The third session of the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Gender Responsive Services Learning Community. Welcome. We're really glad to have you all here today. This learning community, as you know, is for JMHCP, Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program grantees. It's being hosted by our office, the Council of State Governments, Justice Center. We're the training and technical assistance provider for JMHCP grantees, and the learning community itself is funded through the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Justice Assistance. So we're very grateful for that support. And we're excited to continue to hold this learning community in collaboration with our national partner, Becki, who oversees the National Resource Center on Justice Involved Women. So welcome to everyone. Good morning and good afternoon based on your time zone. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join into the learning community session today. As you can see from our title slide, we are focusing in today on the topic of law enforcement and gender responsivity. So taking a closer look at that, it should be a very interesting discussion. So welcome. Next slide. Oh, pardon me, one slide back. Pardon me. Excellent, thank you. So our outline today, you can see that we're going to be covering a few portions during this session. So we're going to start off with some introductions. Then I'm going to be turning it over to Becki to really set the stage for our discussion today. She's going to be covering some key points and what we know about working with women with justice system involvement, and really starting to get us thinking about how that information interplays with law enforcement responses and approaches. So we'll be doing that, and then we will be spending most of the session time today really in an interactive discussion. We're excited to have a guest facilitator, Detective Bogucki, with us, and she's going to speak about her experience on the ground, working directly with women, and really wants to hear a lot about your work with women as well. So we look forward to having an interesting back and forth and discussion as our main portion of the session today. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time at the end wrapping up, and we'll be able to provide you with some additional information in advance of our fourth session happening in early August. And this slide, actually, we have a list of all of our facilitators today. So we'd like to just do a quick introduction, each of us. So I'll turn it over to Detective Bogucki to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Detective Kim Bogucki from Seattle Police Department, the founder of the IT Project, and you'll hear a little more from me later. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Detective Bogucki.
Becki, I've had the pleasure of introducing myself and meeting you all on the first two sessions. Director for the National Resource Center on Justice Involved Women.
Great, thank you, Becki. I'm Allison Upton. I'm a project manager here at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Sarah, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Wurzberg. I'm a program director for the Behavioral Health Division at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I oversee the training and technical assistance for the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, as well as our substance use work.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'll say really quickly, too, most of you either know our colleague, Felicia Lopez-Wright at the Justice Center. Maybe she's your TA coach, or you might know her from these learning community sessions. Just have some great news to share. The reason why she's not here today is because she had a baby last week. And she's doing well, and the baby's doing well, but didn't want you to wonder what happened to Felicia. She has her hands full today. That's why she's not here. She's on leave now, maternity leave, but she sends her well wishes, and she said she's looking forward to listening to the recordings when she comes back. So, so she's here in spirit with us today. I also just wanted to spend just a minute refreshing ourselves on some of the expectations we had for this learning community. So just as a reminder, we have 4 sessions in total. At the time of flying, this is the 3rd out of 4 sessions. And our next session will be in early August, so more on that to come at the end of the session. We really wanted to highlight the point that this learning community is different than a series of webinars. We're really doing a lot of things to try to make this a more interactive experience, which I think it has been. We're really just as a reminder, we're encouraging all of you to be as interactive as possible and to take active participation in each session. I think, basically the more we all put into it, the more we can all get out of the sessions. We have a lot of experience in the learning community, on the grantee teams, and with our facilitators. And so we just encourage you to ask questions as they come up, share, challenges that you're experiencing, share strategies that are working, and really just give the best opportunity to learn from each other. And I think this platform, Zoom, allows, helps facilitate that. So we don't require the Zoom video function, but, if you feel comfortable, we really encourage you to use it, because I think it just lends itself more to an in-person conversation feel. So we just encourage you to continue with that. We've been doing that already today. And so we'll just continue that in the session. We also have been doing some activities in between sessions. And if you haven't had the chance yet already, I really encourage you to take a look at the TED Talk that was linked to for today's session, provided for today's session. It's really engaging, really excellent content. So take a look at that if you haven't already done so. And we'll also be providing another resource in advance of our 4th session next month. Great. Okay, so we want to just quickly do sort of a round robin check-in with each of the teams to see who from each team is participating in the session today. And just as a reminder, if you have, some teams have multiple team members. So if you are, if you could please, again, just pick one spokesperson and let us know who on your team is in attendance and what role they have. We'll just do a quick roll call here. So we'll go alphabetically. And let's start off with Bexar County Commissioners Court. Is anyone able to join the session today from Bexar County?
Yes, ma'am. This is Kathy Johnston. I'm from the Bexar County Women's Mental Health Court, and I am the case manager.
Great. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's, you have meetings for your team today, so we really appreciate you being able to join the learning community session, and welcome.
Thank you.
Next up, Bureau County, Illinois. Is anyone representing Bureau County today? Anyone from Bureau County, Illinois? Okay, I'm not sure. Check the chat as well. If some people may not be able to speak depending on where they are, but we'll try to come back to Bureau County after we continue on with the roll call. Next is Marion County, Indiana. Anyone from Marion County on the line today? Anyone from Marion County, Indianapolis? Sheriff's Office? Okay, we'll continue moving and we'll see if we can come back around to these teams. Next up, I'll ask about Newcastle County, Wilmington, Delaware. Is anyone in the session today from Newcastle?
Yes, I am. This is Alex Schofield. I am the mental health professional in the behavioral health unit.
Great, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it. Okay, and next up is New York State Unified Court System, the Buffalo Human Trafficking Court. I did receive a message today from Buffalo. They are actually, I think, sounds like returning to work. So they had some urgent activities they needed to participate in. So I'm not sure if they were able to join today. I know some team members couldn't. But are there other team members from the Buffalo court on the line today? Okay, I have a feeling they were unable to join because of that. And I'm not sure if the same is for the New York court system in Rochester. Is anyone able to join from the Rochester Human Trafficking Court? They may be under the same circumstances. Anyone from the Rochester court? Okay, I have a feeling likely they were unable to. Oh, did I hear someone? Or okay, so we'll move along and we'll check in to see if anyone from Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office is on the line.
Good afternoon. This is Danielle Willett. I'm the grant project coordinator. Also on the webinar is our director commander of our behavioral services unit, Lieutenant Randy Foley. We also have Dr. Jenna Rollins, which is our grant manager, and we, including our project evaluator partners at Florida Atlantic University, Dr. Cassandra Plunk, and Dr. Von Kirchlow.
Great, thank you so much, Danielle. We appreciate you and the team joining today. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, and next we'll go to Richmond Behavioral Health Authority. Is anyone from your team in the session today?
Yep. Hi, this is Dawn Farrell-Moore, and my teammate Lauren Stevens is on the webinar as well.
Great, welcome. We're really glad you could join us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, next up is Sonoma County, located in Santa Rosa, the probation department. I believe I saw Allison Lobb maybe join in.
That's right, I'm here.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, doing pretty well, thanks.
Great. Glad to have you today. I think you, do you have any other teammates joining, or is it you today?
Not today.
No, I'm here.
Right.
Zoe's here.
Oh, sorry, I looked for you.
Oh,
I didn't see you in the list. We don't sit together, so.
Yeah, I know.
No problem.
You're indifferent at that. Great. I'm glad to have you too, Zoe. Thank you so much to both of you for joining.
Thanks.
Okay, and next up is South Carolina Department of Corrections. Do we have anyone from your team joining in the session today?
Yep, this is Dr. Soto. I am on today's call.
Oh, great. Really happy to have you. Thank you for taking the time today.
Of course.
Okay, and next is the Village of Orland Park, so the police department in Orland Park, Illinois. Anyone on the session today?
Hi, yeah, this is Bonnie Hassan. I'm with our mental health provider, and I'm the project manager.
Great, so you wear two hats, multiple hats. Thank you, so probably more than two, but thank you so much for joining us today. And next we have Warren County, Bowling Green Sheriff's Office in Kentucky. Is anyone from your team on the session? Hi.
Yeah, this is Ben Stickle. I work at the local university, and I believe Dr. Mitch Miller will be on shortly, working with the department to implement their planning strategy.
Great, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining today. And last but not least, we have Yolo County, California. Is anyone from Yolo County on the line?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. This is Preston Shaw with the Yolo County DA's office. I have with me today Jasmine Gonzalez with our probation department and Joseph Bogucki with our public defender's office.
Great, thank you so much to all of your teammates for joining. We really appreciate it. Wonderful. Okay, so we've gotten through our introductions, and now I'm going to turn it over to Becki Nay. Becki?
Hi all. So I thought it would be helpful, well, we thought it would be helpful as sort of an introduction just to do a little refresher about some truths about justice-involved women so that we could have those sort of freshly in our minds as we have a conversation with Kim about, you know, what the importance of understanding women who come in contact with law enforcement. So with that, I don't know that I will have any new information to share with you, but again, just wanted to highlight some points so that we can have those sort of firmly planted in our heads as we go into the conversation with Kim. The first truth. I know we have talked in the past two sessions the fact that women are typically low risk. They pose a lower public safety risk than men. They have lower rates of violence. They are more likely to be arrested for nonviolent drug or other property-related kinds of crimes, and they are less likely to have extensive criminal histories. So, first truth, lower risk, lower violence. Secondly, during the last session, we also talked about women's pathways as being different than men's into criminal justice. Women are much more likely to be victims of past abuse and victimization. We find that they have higher rates of poverty, unemployment, underemployment, and are more likely to have sort of economic hardships in a different way than men. Likewise, much higher rates, as many of you are knowing and working with women who have significantly higher rates of mental illness, substance abuse, and co-occurring disorders. So, secondly, third, women's engagement is largely as a result of relationship issues. Women are very relational. It's one of the reasons why they may commit crimes or be hooked up with abusing or criminal partners. It's one of the reasons why they may use drugs or alcohol. It's also one of the reasons why they can be successful in interventions or regain sobriety and maintain their sobriety. A lot of that has to do with the relationship they may have with a sponsor, with a family member. They may be motivated to reunite with children and families. They may have a good rapport with a facilitator of a class or with a formerly incarcerated a woman who understands where she's coming from. So relationships are really important for women and have everything to do with how they are able to be successful or not. But let's remember that their past relationships are often unhealthy ones. And it sort of learning how to have a healthy relationship is not necessarily something that comes innately, but something that can be taught, and sort of learning how to develop those healthy, trusting relationships are really important for women. And a lot of our intervention work, certainly as they come into criminal justice. Fourth truth. Again, I can't overemphasize that women report very extensive histories of victimization and trauma, often linked to past sexual or physical abuse, neglect, mental illness, and individuals who are exposed to this kind of trauma over time don't easily recover, but certainly we can treat trauma and we can move beyond it. Next one. Oh, here's just a little chart. I'm not going to walk through all the numbers, but this at least is one study done of men and women in prison. Again, men may not report as much. It may be that men have just as high rates as women, but don't typically report many of these things. But this is what we know from self-report data. The one other thing I would just mention on this slide is that let's not forget that women are also primary caretakers of children, so that when dad goes to prison, mom is the one that typically takes care of kids. When mom goes to prison, somebody else takes care of the kids, not dad. 2/3 of parents in prison are parents of minor children. So again, just something to keep in mind as you think about the law enforcement piece. Arresting women with children is a particular issue I think that we should talk a little bit about, if not today, then as we go forward. Next one. And this is really just to say that this is what we know about women right before sentencing. And so you can see again, the really high rates of physical and sexual abuse. And I think the important thing to remember here is this key fact, which is the risk of abuse for boys and men really drops off after childhood, which maybe makes sense. They get bigger, they fight back. Not necessarily true for women. They may also fight back, but it continues through adolescent and into adulthood for women. So it's an ongoing issue for women. Next. Incarceration and reentry. I know some of you are dealing with reentry issues either from jail or prison. Very important. So how can women come out of prison, some of whom may have lost custody of their children, but still want to have a relationship with them? How do they maintain any kind of connection with their kids while they're away? There's stress around reunification. There's still the ongoing issues of poverty and economic issues. There's issues of homelessness. Where do I find a place to live? Well, I can go back to where I came from, often to an abuser. And how do I get a job? How do I get a job and be a mom and provide for childcare and do all my probation and parole appointments? So it's often a lot. So particularly challenging. Next one. And again, just to hit home the fact that we can work with women, given all of those things that we've just talked about, but engaging with them is very different than engaging with men. Again, taking a relational approach where we're trying to build rapport, empathy, trust is a big help, and recognizing that women have strengths. So seeing that their behaviors, which may not be appropriate necessarily, but seeing those as outgrowths of past victimization and trauma as survival skills, and seeing that those are really strengths, and helping them to mobilize those and more pro-social supports in the community to help them be successful is kind of a winning strategy. Next. And lastly, let's not overlook that the cost of incarcerating women is pretty high, not only for children and families, but given the fact that they have lower levels of risk and violence, given that the research suggests they do pretty well in the community with a lot of support, and trying to meet their survival needs. Some of the things we addressed: housing, economics, employment, etc., through other means rather than criminal justice is often kind of the best fit. Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim. So with those things firmly in mind, to sort of talk about some of her experiences working with justice-involved women and some of the things that she's learned as her in her role in the police department in Seattle. So Kim.
Thank you. Just trying to see if I can get, Sarah, is it possible for me to get a full screen so I don't have the slides up? So I can see.
Yes. Yeah, I can stop doing the screen share here.
Thank you. I like to see as many people as I can, even though there's a lot of people that aren't up video wise, but that's okay. So thank you. Odd to be speaking to a computer, so you'll have to excuse me if I'm staring out the window and stuff. I'm used to being in a room or in front of people and getting to like look people in the eyes, as opposed to figuring out what your backdrop is in your house and getting my ADD and ADHD off the hook, trying to focus on people and things. But I am a Seattle police officer detective for 32 years. Started when I was really young here. And I just think before I even start today, I just want to acknowledge kind of what's going on a little bit in the country. Those of us that are working in law enforcement that have been trying to maybe make some change from the inside out. I think it's a great time to think out of the box and try some things that have been like, we're really not sure we can do that, when I think that we're kind of ripe to take a look at some new ways of doing the criminal justice system, period. And I don't think that any idea is ridiculous. I've been swimming, I often say with my partner at work, he's now an assistant chief, we've been swimming uphill for a long time doing police work, kind of going against the grain a little bit, not focusing on incarceration, but trying to focus on the pre-incarceration. And then also, you know, with me starting the IF project 12 years ago, is getting people's stories out so people understand the pathways that actually lead to incarceration from a personal story. So, you know, and also any of us in law enforcement, this is also the time to, I think, acknowledge that, you know, the history of what police represent, what the system represents, the racial inequities, and disproportionality of arresting Black and brown people in our country. And I do think that some of the issues that we're dealing with focusing on women, I also want to make sure as we're working with women, as IF does, and the work I do for SPD, that we're really acknowledging the Black and brown voices and Indigenous people as well, that often are the really silent voices in a lot of the work that we do. So just that's my little 2 cents, and also acknowledging that what the badge and the uniform have represented historically. And I think when we go into communities, having a conversation about that and understanding and educating everybody that's working with us on that is important, especially newer officers coming into law enforcement or doing any type of this work. That's an education piece that I feel like needs to be a part of our tool belt as we walk in and do this type of community outreach. So that's just my 2 cents on what's going on. As tragic as it's been, it's necessary conversation to have, and it's been needed for a long time. So I'm I'm excited to see what can come out the other side of this. And I often say I'll stay in policing as long as they're really going to reimagine it, not just change the shade of the lipstick on the pig and tell me that it's not a pig. So that's kind of the way that I work. I can retire any day. So when we have the discussion part, feel free to ask anything. There's not a lot that if I don't know the answer, I'm not gonna, I promised I wouldn't swear today, but it's really hard to take the cop, sometimes the street out of the cop. But I just would like to have some frank conversation about what we're doing to help women that are involved in the system. So I'm gonna go back a little bit of history. We got a second chance at grant at Seattle Police Department, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago. So that's kind of where we started focusing on really taking a deep dive into what women's needs were versus men. So that's kind of, I started down this journey probably 10 years ago. But 12 years ago, I started a project called the IF Project. And I went into the women's prison. We have 2 women's prisons in Washington State, to meet with the mothers, a group of mothers, to ask permission to work with their daughters. We were going to work on a program to try to figure out how to assist and help them so they didn't potentially end up following in their mother's footsteps to prison. And I'll tell you, as you know, going in, I'd been on 20 years at that time. I thought that I knew everything, and then I had been doing a ton of community work, so I was all that, a bag of chips. And when I walked in there, I realized I really had not learned a lot about the people that were getting incarcerated, the whys, the stories they had. And I was fascinated when I walked in the room, because I also had absolutely a judgment of what I thought I was going to see when I walked in the room. And what I actually saw was a bunch of women that I would probably hang out with, not what I had remembered arresting for 20 years. So that was a big eye-opener for me. They did not like me because I was the police, and probably the last time they saw me or somebody that represented me, they were getting taken away from their family, their friends, and their kids. So there was a lot of healing that needed to happen. It didn't really happen, I don't think, in that first meeting, but I did ask the if question, which was, if there was something somebody could have said or done to change the path that led you to prison, what would it have been? And they kind of looked at me with a blank stare. Nobody really said anything. But there was one inmate in there named Renata Abramson. And Renata comes from, I would say, a generational family of incarceration. And her family, it wasn't a matter if you went to prison, it was a matter how many times and what you learned and were you a better criminal, and how to literally pull the wool over the police's eyes. They were the ones that are constantly trying to change their game as we're chasing them, you know, the whole spin cycle that happens. But something in Renata changed that day. And she actually started asking the women to answer that question. So when I went back into prison to spend the night, because I've spent one night in prison, Renata handed me a stack of papers, and it was the answers to that if question, if something could have said or done something to change the path that led you to prison. And she handed me a stack of answers. And I often say that when I first sat down to read them, I didn't really know what they, you know, she's like, remember that question you asked? And it's like, I only remember because I was so nervous that one of you was going to shank me or something, because I've been watching too much locked up reality TV, but kind of. So, you know, she handed me a stack of papers, and I'll tell you, it was one of those defining moments that we have sometimes in our lives. And I talk about just the transfer of that energy of the paper to me, and then reading it in the prison, and I got pretty emotional, and I had to like put them down and read them later. But I was struck by the women being completely real and honest about what had happened. And, you know, out of the blue, there wasn't a lot of prompting, but again, we know women are relational. They like to talk, they like to express. And I had like a stack of people's, basically their story of what led them to where they were. And the reason why they wrote it was to prevent further people from following in their footsteps. You know, find that silver lining of what happened to them. Is there one way they could just, if they could just change a child's path, a trajectory slightly, because their first inclination was, how do we help kids not follow in our footsteps? What they didn't know, what I didn't know, is what would happen is we would start to take a look at what really led them as women to prison, and take a look at things with a gender responsive lens. And you know, I often say, I call those gals my OGs. They've been around, you know, working with IF now for 12 years, and we've watched their journeys. We have a documentary that's filmed for 7.5 years that's a good it's good to watch if you're doing this kind of work, because it gives you the ups and downs of people's journey on in prison and coming home and family and stuff. So IF was created randomly, and the Seattle Police Department's, it's its own nonprofit now, but it still lets me do my liaison work with the Seattle Police Department. I'm in the collaborative policing unit, and work with the IF project. The Second Chance Act grant that we got, we started taking a look at what these answers were, 3,000 answers from women, men, and juveniles that are incarcerated, to build programming around what was missing for them. So we could take a look at what was missing regionally in our city, in our county, and go, okay, this is what they say they need. These are things that are missing. How do we get them funded? How do we bring in collaborative partners? I mean, this isn't, one of the things is, it's not the police's job to do all of these things. It's about where in the system, who in the system wants to look at it with this lens and make the change, and then where are the gaps, and how do you pull in nonprofits that are doing this work? And lots of times I talk about, collaboration is absolutely a must. I often say, you can take a one lane, you can be on your lane going to the city, trying to get everybody to the city, or you can build a freeway and understand what lane everybody has and collaboratively work together to get more people to the city. And that's what we've learned to do. And then taking a look at the gaps, it's a lot easier to go after funding and stuff if you can figure out where the gaps are from the people that you're trying to serve. I haven't been incarcerated. I'm white, so that means I have privilege in this world, in this country. And there's a lot of people that need a lot of assistance, and their voices aren't heard. And I think it's super important in any of the work that we're doing, reimagining the justice system and stuff, is to have people at the table that we are trying, that they are the target audience of who we're trying to assist and help. And, no disrespect to any letters after names or I guess I have a DET before mine, letters before name, but that lived experience is absolutely how the IF project has done its job for 12 years, and as a result has established credibility. And with a lot of the people that we've worked with, women, men, and juveniles, having a relationship with law enforcement was never, ever, ever going to be in their purview. That was just not going to happen. But when they were at the table and equal partners in making decisions and putting programming together, it actually became a lot less of that us and them divide that naturally exists right now in our society. So that's kind of like a little bit of what's going on. We've established, we have a writing workshop, a writer series that goes a little bit more in depth to their stories. We have a reentry program called PrEP, Personal Reentry Education Plan. We started looking at reentry programs and realized they were really broad brushed. And what wasn't happening was the individual blueprint of what every person needs when they get out. We know there's some pillars that are needed, but everybody's got a little bit of a different accoutrement that needs to be personally for theirs. So it's a deep dive into not just housing and job, but if they have kids, like what else, if there's mental health, if there's codependency issues, and sometimes it might be, it might be super detailed. So how, when somebody's getting ready to get out, prior to them getting out, can they do a deep dive and realize what they're going to need to be successful? And now in that, with the reentry stuff, because we've been doing it for so long, we've also found that what their perception is versus the reality is drastically different. And for females in general, the stuff that we have seen, the isolation and loneliness is palpable. It kind of reminds me of when somebody dies and everybody's around, like somebody comes home and everybody's around and here's your phone and welcome home and here's the kids, which means now you got to deal with your LFOs and feed your kids and find a place to stay. And then everybody leaves and they're kind of stuck in this place of, holy cow, like now what do I do? And I actually miss my prison family. And a lot of the women that we talk to versus the men that we talk to, because pretty much most of the people that I'm around are people that have been impacted and spent time in prison. The men seem to be okay with the letting go of the prison family because it's very different, because women are relational. The women they actually miss the people in prison that they're told you can't talk to them anymore, you can't interact with them. And when they get out too, if one of you is on paper, at least in Washington, you're not supposed to interact. So at least the one thing IF's been able to do is provide a safe place that's DOC approved where they can come together, and they can almost have, one of the guys wanted to call it FA meeting, a Felons Anonymous meeting, where they could get together and share like their troubles and their trials and their successes and different resources. So we've been able to do that. And then for women, the one thing we also found is there's a ton of social emotional needs that weren't met at some point in their life. So they came up with topics for us to put programming together for stuff that DOC significantly underfunded in Washington State couldn't provide. So we could get in there and get them on a little bit of their journey for that. And then we have a mentoring program, which we're taking a hard look at, because it's hard when you're, you know, a couple of our women of color have been like, well, it's really hard because I'm a Black woman that's done time in prison, and I have this white woman that wants to be my mentor that doesn't have any understanding of what it's like for me to walk in the world and different socioeconomic, you know, levels and stuff like that. So, but it's also been an educational process for both sides. So it's been good. But trying to think, the other thing that I'm super interested, like it sounds like you have a lot of mental health court type people here. One of the things that Seattle's worked with, and I definitely have some connection for that, and maybe it'll be, I talked to the folks at CSG before, you know, we've been doing the mental health provider and officer partnership now, I want to say for almost 8 years in the city, so that we can reduce incarceration and actually deal with mental health issues as opposed to it being an arrestable offense. So that's been a really good program. And often I find in law enforcement is we don't often talk about those programs very much because we just kind of do them. So Lieutenant Dan Nelson runs that program from Seattle Police Department. He's amazing. The other thing that we're starting to look at is diversion with specifically women, and what does that look like? So there's a program that the YWCA is working with in Seattle. I've been working with them too, as well as the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office for Domestic Violence. David Martin is the head prosecutor there, and he's been working on a program where if they run a woman's name, let's say the woman was they run her name, she's the suspect now. I hate these words, but I'm just going to use them for, they're the ones everybody kind of knows. They sometimes change, but she's a suspect now. If they run her and it looks like she has been a victim of any type of gender-based violence, if there's been no contact orders, you know, rape, sexual assault, child abuse, anything where she was actually the victim, they're taking a look at, depending on the case, can they not file on her because they're taking a look at the fact that that trauma probably was not dealt with, that led her to now step on the other side and become a suspect in some capacity, potentially a survival type crime. And as opposed to filing, they're sending her to do a program, and they're focusing on Black women and brown women primarily, but they actually got VOCA funds to do this. And I thought it was extremely fascinating because we have too many people, especially women in jail and prison, that trauma just has not been dealt with, and they will continue the pattern until the trauma is dealt with. So how do we take that crime, put it aside, and go and have them actually deal with the trauma of potentially decades, some of them, as opposed to having it be manifest into criminal activity, which means incarceration. So I'm super excited about that program, and I think also what I spoke of earlier, kind of what's going on in the country, those types of programs, I'm curious to hear from you all if you're doing stuff like that. What does it look like? I feel like, again, we're at this time where we can try some stuff. And I also know with these grants, you get stuck into your IRBs and what you say you're doing. And sometimes you get like 6 weeks in or 6 months in and you're like, man, I wish we would have tried this, but it wasn't in a part of our grant. But if some of those things are coming up now, I'm interested in hearing about what you're doing, what's working and what's not working. And then also from, you know, a law enforcement perspective, what do you feel like, those of you that are working with law enforcement? I don't see there's a ton of, I heard one lieutenant from Florida, so thanks for representing on the call. You know, what are you running into as far as like training goes as well? And those of you that are doing this, what's your relationship been like with law enforcement? Where are the glitches, or are there glitches? Are they open? Because sometimes we can be a pretty locked down organization. So I think I'm gonna stop there for a second, see if we can start taking some, some questions, and we can go from there. Anybody got any feedback or questions or comments? Don't everybody talk at once.
I have a quick little comment. My name is Zoe. I work in Santa Rosa, California, and I work in a nonprofit, and I work with mentally ill pretrial offenders, and it's a relatively new program to us. But this is just really inspiring to hear you speak. I feel like I've been a little bit disconnected from law enforcement recently, especially just with everything that's been going on, and especially in our county. So it's really nice to hear from somebody that's directly involved in law enforcement and is pioneering something that's so progressive. So I really appreciate you coming on today. That was really interesting to hear about.
Thank you, Zoe.
I wanted to ask a quick question. Preston Schaub, I'm with the Yale County DA's office. We run a mental health program as well as collaborative courts as well. And I hear you mentioning a lot of these special kind of carve-out diversions and programs specifically targeting women and kind of investigating what causes led to the criminality, what we can do to address it. Something that always jumps out at me when I hear, especially a state actor like a law enforcement agency or a DA's office, whoever it is, looking into making these special carve-outs for these groups of individuals. Do you ever get pushback or any kind of issues involving like Fifth Amendment equal protection type arguments saying, hey, you can't treat this class of people differently than this class of people, even though scientifically and what we know based on evidence is there is reason to treat them differently. They're not necessarily situated the same way, but because of the Supreme Court and the way we interpret equal protection, it's sort of a men and women in this context are equal. And so therefore you can't, as a state actor, treat one group separately than the other group. Then again, in order for that to be a problem, someone actually has to complain about it. So it's like if no one's raising the issue, then no one's going to actually have to litigate that. But has there ever been any kind of pushback to be like, hey, we understand the work you're doing, we really like it, but we're concerned from a legal perspective that you're going to implicate these bigger issues and cause a problem down the road?
Okay. Well, that's a good question, Preston. I have not, in the 12 years of doing IF, run into anything like that. But I've also been able to talk about other agencies or organizations in the nonprofit world that are focusing on men, or that there's a lot more programming for men. So it's probably more of a deflection than anything. The Survivors First program, although they're focusing on women and primarily Black and brown women, they would not take a male in the program so that they don't, because they're taking government money, they don't end up in a situation like that. But I do think that it's imperative to those of us that are doing this work that I want to drill home that women have got to be, there's got to be a different way. There cannot be this broad brushing that we're trying to do in any of this work. I mean, I even think of law enforcement, like when you're on a call and you have to arrest a woman. Well, first of all, I like to drill into law enforcement. Like there's a story every time you put a set of handcuffs on. There is a story that you don't know. So how much do you want to know? Like what's your opportunity? Because we have discretion. And if you are going to have to handcuff a woman, is it too much to ask if she's got a kid? Is there a kid at school that's going to come home to an empty house? And now just it fuels the hatred for law enforcement or the fear of law enforcement of that person's going to take my mom or dad away. And I sometimes want to, I don't want to say backhand because that'd be assault, but like people that are like, oh, I'm going to call the police on you if you don't come over and eat your food, and I'm sitting there in my plain clothes going, that is the worst messaging. But I have not run into that yet. So, and if I do, then it would just be a conversation about it is a silent voice, it's not heard. And we all know when you remove a woman from community, it is a much different ripple effect than if you remove a man from community. Don't disregard to men, but lots of times the women are the ones that are taking care of the kids or the neighbor's kids or the cousin's kids or the aunt's kids or whatever. So that is the ripple effect is enormous. And I also think as we're getting people back into community, that it should be community, which part of community to me is the police, is that they should be a part of understanding what it's like for them to come home and having some grace sometimes in how we end up dealing with, and a lot of you are dealing with mental health. It's a medical condition. that we're incarcerating people for, you know.
And I would just say from a case law perspective, it's not that have done a lot of research in this area, especially as it relates to providing, if you will, differential kinds of treatment for women versus men. And the issue is not that you're providing this program for women. You're allowed to provide programs for women, and you can provide them in the ways that are gender responsive and trauma informed, as long as there are services available to men. So they don't have to be the same exact services, but you should be providing services in some way to both. And those have been pretty much upheld in the criminal justice world that I'm aware of, to say as long as you are following your vision and your mission and you're providing services in these ways, and you are providing comparable yet perhaps different kinds of services to men, then you're okay. So that's my very unlegal, unlawyerly kind of read of the case law as I've looked at it as relates to justice involved folks.
Thanks, Becki. I appreciate that. So does anybody else have any comments or questions before I go into more specific questions? So so in the change of the current culture that's going on right now in our country, has anybody had to like look at, have you found yourself looking at things differently? Because most of us are in this to help people, I would assume, but with this new, you know, civil rights movement, has anybody had a different way that you've looked at this, or maybe changed slightly the work that you're doing? Preston, or you want to talk about that?
We're experimenting with racial and gender blind prosecution. So we partnered with Stanford University, and we're going to have kind of a beta template run out in our charging system that essentially when we get police reports review, we're not going to know the name, race, gender, criminal history, any of the information of who the individual is we're determining charges for. We're going to be able to essentially go through the process of reviewing the facts of the case, determining whether or not we have our standards of proof met and we can charge the case. And then once that case is actually cleared for charging, then on the backside, we'll get all that personal identifying information so we can, you know, figure out what the criminal history is, if there's enhancements that we need to charge, evaluate the case for probation, prison, diversion, whatever the opportunity is. So that's a process that we've been involved in for I think the last year and a half, and I know we're getting pretty close to rolling out the first version of it. So we're excited for it. It's going to be definitely a learning curve, but some of us have already tried to look at cases without looking at the rap sheets to kind of, you know, keep that information to the side. But it's hard when our reports aren't designed to be read that way.
Right. I know NYU was doing some research on that probably 3 years ago, so I might try to hook you into what they did. They didn't go that deep, but they did remove race out of the paperwork just to see where and that was in a California county, and I can't remember off the top of my head right now which one it was. So so those of you that are working with law enforcement, are they open to hearing about what it would be like to be gender responsive and trauma informed? Do they understand what that is? Is there places, agencies that you're working with that actually train officers what that means? Anybody?
Hey, this is Alex Schofield. I'm the mental health professional for Newcastle County Police here in Delaware. So we have the co-responder model. So I am partnered up with a police officer and we respond to the mental health calls. And I've found that our agency has been very open to being gender informed. We're actually in the process of doing a PowerPoint specifically about that. That's going to be rolled out in roll call so that all the officers can see it. And it'll just be me, you know, giving information similar to what we first saw by Becki. And just giving, you know, basic information about, you know, there are big differences between men and women. And it's always good to be informed. And then that way, you know, you can make informed decisions. and trauma-informed. They're definitely trauma-informed. I mean, they're CIT officers. We have the behavioral health unit. Our captain is on the NAMI board. So they've been very receptive and have really been front runner in our state for advocating for that kind of approach and for the kind of struggles that I think women and also men have based on, you know, economic hardship and mental illness and substance use. So, and I think that other agencies now are catching on, you know, they're catching on locally, and that's always nice to see.
Anybody else? Is anybody else working side by side doing your grant with law enforcement if you're not a part of law enforcement? Nobody else. The ones the people that aren't working. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, this is Allison from the Justice Center, but I wanted to actually ask Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. I know that Lieutenant Foley and the whole team, they have tons of collaboration. So I'm curious, you know, with multiple counties, Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, et cetera. And I'm just curious if you all, what your thoughts are on this question, if you think people are receptive, you know, law enforcement in your state is receptive to this type of training, what you know that's going on so far. So I'll call on Palm Beach.
Hi, this is Danielle Willett, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. Like the individual who just spoke, we actually do CIT training for all of our officers in Palm Beach County at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. We also have our civilian therapists that team up with our detectives that also go through the CIT process, the 40-hour CIT training. We work very closely, and I know I've mentioned this on our last call, that when it comes to reentry, we have really grown as far as with serving women. We have seen more women being incarcerated and being released into the community, and based on their needs, they have a higher level of needs than males do, and we always focus on that trauma-informed care modality. So there's a lot of collaboration within Palm Beach County with our reentry community providers as well as our agency.
So can I ask a follow-up question, Danielle? Like how does the police department, like the officers that are, when you talk about the reentry piece, I'm curious as to, are they involved in any part of that program or understanding or welcoming home or whatever that looks like? Do you have any, any officers that, because those tend to be the little like, unions have those salts where they, they go into organizations and start saying you should unionize. Is there officers that you have doing some of that so that they can go back to the precinct and kind of educate other officers indirectly?
So we do actually. Palm Beach County has a task force. It's the reentry task force, and there's juvenile reentry as well as the adult reentry. So we have our local municipalities, our police department staff, and we also have PBSO, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. Like I said, Lieutenant Foley, he's the commander of the Behavioral Services Unit. He participates in all of our task force and all of the stakeholder meetings that occur on a monthly basis.
Great.
I would add to that, and I work really closely with reentry in Palm Beach County in addition to this project with PBSO. And Danielle, correct me if I'm wrong, our law enforcement, while some may sit on the reentry task force, that I don't know if they are necessarily out there greeting our individuals as they are coming back to the community, as I think maybe, Ken, what you were trying, getting at.
I'm kind of, my question was, is with the police involvement in this work, is it all punitive
Yes.
or rearrest type stuff, or is there any like understanding, differently, is my question.
Yes, and thank you for pointing that out. So each month we have a peace walk, and we actually, it is law enforcement. We go to different communities where we see a high volume of reentry. We have, it's called a heat map. So we have a high volume, wherever there's a high volume of returning citizens going into that particular community, we do peace walks with the local municipalities as well as the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. So there actually is a lot of engagement when it comes to returning citizens within the community, as well as just, the areas that show to have high crime scenes.
Right. So part of the stuff that we've been working on here is, or what we've seen happen too, is as these fractured relationships with community exist, is we slowly start to build them back together. Then community actually calls when they need some type of assistance, whether it's lots of times it's domestic violence for the women that we're dealing with, and it's always hard for them to call the police. And then at least we, if they make the phone call because there's some trust established, they can be referred to, proper assistance and resource so that they don't end up in a violent situation themselves too. And or what to do with their kids. If I had $1 for every time like they do not know what to do with their kids, and they're super afraid of their kids following in their footsteps, what does that look like? That's part of building some of this. Some of these other juvenile programs out, and using people that have been impacted as some of those mentors and staff people for those kids to learn from. So I'm a real proponent for that. I do think that it's interesting, also just as far as from a law enforcement capacity, because there's a disproportionality between Black and brown people being arrested in the country, then they have a record. They can't, lots of places apply to even be police officers if they've turned their lives around. So it's lots of times, at least in, we don't always reflect, the uniform doesn't always reflect what the community looks like. So I do think that that's kind of a miss that we need to reevaluate in some type of policing in some areas. Does anybody know of any training that goes on for cadets, for lack of a better word? I mean, I think it was you, Alexander, or Danielle, that said you are doing that. Super interested in the roll call training that you're talking about. Does anybody else know of anything that's going on in academies for this stuff to be addressed? Becki, you might know that.
Not much that I'm aware of, honestly, on this particular topic. I think in my experience, officers are getting more what I would call sort of the crisis intervention training, sort of sensitivity around those kinds of issues. Law enforcement have been asked to be everything to everybody, community, but I've not seen much in the way of responsive training, and I certainly have not seen that either in corrections departments.
Right. I would say, well, in Washington State, I do know they have a small little piece on being gender responsive, but I think it depends on where you're at. And then I think the other thing that I was wondering, and we've got, this is kind of police focused, I guess, a little bit, but the mental health professionals, corrections and stuff. I don't see gender responsive or understanding that in most parts of the criminal justice system in general. I mean, I think there's a couple public defenders on here. Do you all get trained up on what that looks like? So when you're representing somebody, that's a part of the, what goes through how to represent them differently than probably a man or identifies as?
Sure. This is Joe Bogucki, public defender out in Yolo County. So, we don't have any specific training, or I didn't get any specific training, but you get on the job training really quickly and right away, in terms of learning pretty quickly that a lot of your female clients who are there as a result of a very traumatic upbringing. I haven't received any specific training on it other than self-training. And, you see it in the full range of female clients. You can see it in, your murder clients in terms of women experiencing battered women syndrome, and you can see it all the way down to, you know, your revolving door drug users. You know, one area that I see a lot of commonality between the genders is those that have grown up in the foster care system as well, because they tend to have a lot of very similar shared experiences in terms of physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. So that's been something that I've noticed over my time as well.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Officer Kearns, Newcastle County Police. For our police department, we do a diversity training where we touch on gender issues. We also touch on LGBT issues during the gender or the diversity training with the recruits. We also have a bias-based police training for our recruits that's a 4-hour block so that they touch on all their biases, not just gender. We do every 2 years keep up with the mental health training where gender is touched on, but it's not a whole block itself. So we do try to have a gender focused training in our diversity training. But again, it's in the beginning of the academy. And I don't know if anybody knows what a police academy looks like, but the beginning of the academy is a lot of running, push-ups, being screamed at, making sure that you have the right mindset of what it takes to be a police officer. So I will say that in the beginning of the academy, I don't know how much they're retaining, but we do touch on gender in our diversity training.
Okay. So Colleen, do you have anything? Are you work at the academy? Do you work at the academy, or do you just?
I teach at the academy. I teach autism awareness, de-escalation. I teach about our mental health unit. So I'm in there quite a bit, but no, I'm not made for the drill sergeant.
Right. Yeah, me neither. That would. I'm just curious, or anybody out there, do you ever bring in people that have been impacted? Do you ever bring in men or women or men to discuss like what their story is so that people can put a human face to someone that's made it around, you know, done their time, gotten out and turned their lives around, so that people in this profession, not just policing, but even in, you know, prosecution and defense, like you see that, you know, people can change or stuff. Is anybody doing anything like that?
So we have with our Hero Help program on the addiction side. So just to touch base.
Did you call it Hero Help?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
So on the addiction side, we actually had somebody that went through our program. So instead of being arrested for their possession charge, they had the opportunity to get treatment in lieu of arrest. So we followed that individual for a year during their treatment program, and they did relapse, but then they got back into treatment, and currently now they work in a treatment facility helping others in outreach. So they come into our police academy and talk about what made that change positive for them and what it took, hitting that rock bottom of like, holy crap, I might go to jail and I might lose my kids and I might never be able to be a mother again. So having that person come into our academy during the Hero Help program has help people buy into both the Hero Help mental health and the Hero Help addiction side. Hearing her story and knowing that she's doing well now and her kids are in her life, and she's actually a friend of a police officer's. And then we also have a sister of a police officer that comes in and talks about her addiction and how she turned her life around. And now she is a director of Northeast Treatment Center. So we do have two people come in and talk about what's that like. And we also have the officer talk about what it's like to be the sister of somebody going through addiction and mental health treatment, and to be a sister / officer of that person and how that affects them, and how other officers, when they talk negatively about a situation, what that made that officer feel like, and to be more aware of, you might not know what the person next to you is going through kind of mentality.
That's powerful, Colleen. I think that part of like training or discussion that I would like to see further in all these modalities that we're working in is like, we have a lot more in common than we actually realize. And until we start having conversation about the reality of what our, you know, sometimes our personal lives are, the experience that we've had, or even the experience that we've had, you know, on the job, that it hopefully starts to, you know, get those divides lessened. But I think it has to come from the genuine experience being shared, as opposed to, oh, I don't do well reading books and literature and, you know, a bunch of stuff like that. But I have learned more from people being really honest about like what's been going on and trying to problem solve from there, as opposed to what you see on a piece of paper that represents that person that's left out this part of that person and what happened. And I do want to say too, like, I think for people that are working with police, the trauma that we go through on a daily basis too does not get dealt with very often. So it's a little hard if you're not doing your own personal inventory to try to figure out how to be compassionate or empathetic to somebody else when you haven't dealt with your own stuff. And I imagine most people here, you know, I'm just a little silent reminder, or a little, not silent, but a little gentle reminder to, like, you're dealing with people's trauma on a daily basis, especially in the mental health world, with it being something that has been like the thing that's not talked about for so long, but the thing that's actually, you know, it's an epidemic in our country that's not dealt with very well, and it ends up becoming a criminality issue, which it should just not be. So make sure you're taking care of yourselves. Not just with tequila, by the way, just want to say that. See, I saw some laughter. You all doing the COVID-19 too. I got it going on in my belly right now. So the other question, I mean, I think we got, what, 10 more minutes, Allison? Is that about right? Or so?
Yes, that's about right. Don't worry, you can take a little more if you like, but
yeah. So I mean,
about 5 minutes.
Okay. I mean, does anybody else have any other, you know, comments or questions or collaboration ideas? Anything out there?
So I'm going to ask a question, actually, Kim, to you, because this is a question that I've been asked by a few different people around the country recently. So you were talking about the diversion program for women, and something maybe for you and for Becki to answer, actually. So I'll ask both of you. One of the questions that I've been actually getting recently is really around thinking through how to make gender responsive and trauma informed pre-sentence reports. So that way the court has all of the information they need in terms of background information to make decisions. And I thought of that in terms of what you were discussing of the program in Seattle, Kim, in terms of them like looking at the trauma history. And I know that was a piece of the conversation when I've been asked this as well. So I'm just curious if either of you have, you know, thoughts or an example related.
Becki, the expert, I'll let you go first.
I was hoping that I could learn from you. So pre-sentence investigation reports would suggest that there's been a plea, right? And you're looking for what should the sentence be. I just want to be clear about what point in the system are we talking about, because I think it depends then what you can do. So if this is a pre-sentence investigation to decide whether someone should go to prison or someone should be on probation, for example, I think then there are all kinds of ways that folks could do a gender responsive assessment, could do issues around trauma, could think about what resources exist in the community. Would she be better served in that way? So I think there are opportunities. I don't know, well, there are some probation departments who do PSIs. We're certainly doing that work because they're doing it for women when they come on to a community supervision caseload. So they are doing some of that work. You know, it gets a little tricky when you talk about pretrial, obviously, because we're talking about people who are innocent and we shouldn't be doing very much to them at that point in time, although there are some, and certainly in California, in the pretrial programs always talked about helping women get housing. And there's a program in Poughkeepsie, New York, where I've worked, and they're doing some interviews, shall we say, with women who are on pretrial supervision waiting to get into court, because they know that what drives risk a lot of times for women, as some of you have said, is the very high needs that they have. So they may be at low risk to commit another offense, but they're at very high risk of not getting their needs addressed. So there are some even pretrial agencies who are offering assistance to women who can then volunteer or not, because we can't require folks to do things at that stage. But we certainly can do things at the PSI stage after there's been a sentence and we're, a disposition, and we're certainly waiting for a sentence. So that's my babble about that. I can't think of specific examples, but I do know that there are some probation departments who have revised their PSIs to be more gender responsive, because that's the work they're doing with the supervision caseload.
So the survivor, thank you, Becki. The Survivor First program is fairly new in Seattle. Part of the pushback has been like a detective works on this case for like a week and then gets the decline or something. Is like, what the heck? I just put all that, like, why were they declined? There was a lack of communication going on. And I actually ran into one of the detectives that dealt with that. And, I did say to the prosecuting attorney's office, this is a great program, but you have to bring the detectives or police at the table, not tell them what to do, but say, hey, can you work the case this far? And then if it's a good referral to take a look at, because they just signed an MOU to share information on people's I can't remember what the technical, anyways, you can find out if somebody's been a victim of, they're doing a county share right now on that. But bringing everybody to the table about what that discussion looks like, as opposed to one entity making a decision and not sharing the trickle back. And my hope would be an officer can have that access and make a decision at that point. Do you want to arrest, or do you want to refer and figure out on a resource? Because if we're really going to look at defunding and reallocating money, we have to start somewhere. And it cannot be like kneecap us and take $200 million of our $400 million budget, and we're going to have all these people off doing all this stuff. Which is great. I would love to have only mental health referral or chem dependency referral. We also know we cannot force somebody to take their medication or go to rehab. So there's got to be a little bit of that as a part of it. But if detectives are going to be doing follow-up work, or officers having the opportunity to refer or divert women or men or juveniles, it doesn't really matter to me, into programs that we know are sustainable, that they're legitimate, that there's benchmarks and there's follow-up work that's going to be done, I think is a great idea. And I think that something like Survivors First is, they're trying it and they're showing success. It's small, but I think it's something that could be built out. And for a lot of these women, it's the first time. I don't want prison to be, and if I had $1 for every time I heard this, it's the break that I needed, or it was the interruption that I needed. And that's sad to me that we have to remove them from society and put them in a prison to actually have them do this kind of evaluation. But how is the interruption big enough for them that they actually go and get the help that they need prior to staying in this cycle of a system with the abuse and socioeconomic issues, like all those things that we know. So thank you for that question, Sarah. Allison, should I turn it back over to you?
We have a little more time if people have more questions.
Yeah, does anybody else have questions or comments anymore?
Well, I would just ask, I mean, one of the things, based on what you just said, Kim, just as a last comment from me, I find that there are many law enforcement agencies, prosecutors' offices, judges, and others who would gladly do the diversion work and would gladly share information, but our systems don't often allow it. And the biggest complaint I get from virtually everybody is that we don't have enough resources in our community to deal with the problems that we have. So yeah, great idea. I'd love to do that, but we have this grant and I can do a little bit of services for a year, or I need to move different services in, or I need to find money to do that. So what are your words of wisdom, Kim, about how to deal with kind of a very lack of resources to deal with all these problems we know we need resources to deal with?
Well, Becki, I'd be sitting on my multi-million-dollar yacht in the Caribbean.
Yeah, the answer to that question, right?
It's the $1 million question. But if you take a look at how much it costs for the cost of incarceration, we need to, those are conversations we need to start having if we're going to start pumping money into these systems. But again, it's got, I mean, even like like the LEAD program, you can't force somebody to go to rehab if they don't want to go to rehab. But I do think that we, somebody, I think you said it earlier, or somebody said it, you know, police are being asked to do a lot of things that we really, that they are not in our, they're just not, we're not trained on it. I mean, I've been on 32 years. I probably do more mental health, social work type stuff than I do any type of enforcement type of things. But we have to find, I mean, we have to find the money. We're finding the money to incarcerate people. We totally are finding the money to incarcerate people, you know, and we're not finding the money to help people. So part of, if you're going to revamp and reimagine criminal justice system and policing and stuff, you can't just cut police budgets without a strategic plan and what that looks like. And, you know, and there's other budgets that probably could be cut that end up putting people in the system as well. So, and I, you know, like I said at the beginning of the thing, I don't think that there's any idea that is too far-fetched to take a hard look at right now, because I think we're at a tipping point in the country to make some really potentially enormous change in how this system works. Because the system is working exactly how the system from urban design in cities, exactly how it was set up to work, it is working. So we have to break a lot of stuff down in order to make some change, but I think it's incremental, and it's trying some things and showing that it works. And I think part of, you know, I was glad, Colleen shared, you have to hear people's stories on what worked for them. You know, we need to have a human connection with what change looks like and feel it, because the way people are going to change the way they spend their money is if they have an emotional connection to it. And that's what I believe. So what does that look like? I mean, I'm totally open to it. Anybody want to get a hold of me and hash some stuff out over happy hour or something virtually? I'm down with having some conversations about, like, you guys are doing some amazing work. You're changing things out there. Like, how do you take it and keep going with it? How do we blow it out bigger? What does that look like? You know, how do we remove police from being the ones that are first responders in a mental health situation? Can we train people up to know what that's like? Can they have a direct line to 911? So if they need it, there's an officer that shows up. Like, what does that look like? But you know, it is the time, and we're not going to have this window open for very long. I mean, I firmly believe when COVID gets figured out, we're going to go back to what I like to call the ostrich syndrome, which everybody sticks their head in the sand and stays in that little linear I thing. And as opposed to people's ears are open differently right now than I've ever seen in my life, because we're at home and we're listening to news differently. And honestly, we're looking at our own mortality with what COVID's blasting out there. So it's the time to, like, put some things out there that you thought about, or to make some change, especially with the civil rights movement that's going on right now too. There's much needed change in all of these systems. So I appreciate everybody, you know, doing the work that you're doing is so important. So, and especially those of you that are, you know, that are working with law enforcement or in law enforcement. It's not easy time to be in it right now, but if you're in it doing this work, I don't want you to leave yet, because I don't want to be stuck with a bunch of other people that I don't necessarily agree with that are in my department that are going to stay. But we have to make change from the inside out.
One thing, if I could add, that we're trying in Richmond, Virginia, is we have a grant that's still pending, but we hope to have a co-responder team that's including a peer. And ideally, it would be one male and one female peer that would respond with a mental health clinician and the police to, right now it's kind of more focused on mental health, SUD recovery calls, but you know, it could morph into other things, but we're hoping that having a peer on the team will help with the motivation of the individual, also help with the officers to just hear the stories of the peers themselves. Our CIP training has added peers that come every week. They have a CIP training. There's a peer there telling their story to all these officers, and it's very overwhelming and sometimes a little stressful for the peer to tell their story, but she gets such great feedback from the police about, you know, her courage and appreciate her telling her story to them. So it's been really empowering for us to have peers on all levels of our services.
Yeah, there's a Captain Minton in Richmond PD, if he's still there, that I've done some work with in the past. He's amazing. Do you know him? You froze. Anyways, he's amazing.
I'm not sure.
He's amazing. He looks at, his lens is wide. So I'm glad to hear that that's going on in Richmond. From the work I've done with them and in the jails and stuff there, it doesn't surprise me because the PD has been working really hard to try to figure out how to bridge some of those gaps that were pretty staggering to them. So
yeah.
Great. Well, Kim, this is Allison. I just, we can't thank you and Becki and everyone on the in the session today. This was just such an interesting discussion. I mean, I know there's creativity out here, but to hear about your own experience and to hear and learn more about the team work, like we work with these grantees and we just heard so many new things today, so I just think the discussion has to continue and we just really appreciate all that, everyone brought to the table today for this session. Thank you so much.
Right, and I want to just say one thing. If any of you need me, if you need to use my being a police officer and some of the work that you're doing to talk to your local law enforcement in some capacity, please, sometimes cops listen to cops differently, unfortunately, but I'm open to having that discussion or pushing some envelopes if I need to. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you so much. That's so generous. So we'll, I feel like we could just keep talking, but we do have the time limits for today. But again, thank you so much to everyone, and just want to point out a couple of things. We have one more session left in this learning community. It's going to be on August 5th, and it's going to be focusing on court processes and a gender-responsive approach. So we have a resource for you, a brief resource to read that we think will be helpful, and I'll be sending out that resource along with the slide deck from today, the recording from today, which would be great to listen to again or to share with your teammates so they can hear what we talked about. We'll send all those resources out next week as a follow-up, and please included in the slide deck towards the end is all of our contact information and a lot of the resources we have listed that went into some of the slides that were prepared for today. So feel free to look at those, and please reach out to us if you have any questions or follow-up. All of our contact information is there. Sarah, Becki, I'll look to you if you have anything else to add before we wrap up.
Just thank Kim for your time. I know your time is precious right now given everything that's happening in the world. So I appreciate that very much.
No, I'm glad I was here and got to hear what was going on nationally. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to all the teams out there, and stay safe. We'll look forward to seeing you again in August. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.